Well, good morning, everyone. We are still getting people in here, so we just wait another few seconds. It's streaming in. All right, so let's start. So on behalf of the Finnish-British Chamber of Commerce, Danish-UK Association, and us, the Norwegian-British Chamber of Commerce, I wish you all welcome to this Returning to Work webinar. And Jacqui and Anna, they will take you through this, all the stages we need to know. So Anna and Jacqui, please.
Unmute myself first, sorry. Yeah, good morning everyone, and thank you for joining us. Just as a bit of housekeeping, if you have any questions, if you could just please pop them in the Q&A box and then we will address them at the end of the session. As mentioned already, I'm the HR manager at Goodwille, and Anna is one of the HR advisors in my team. We'll both be speaking today, as mentioned, on the hot topic of returning to work after COVID-19. So initially, I have the unenviable task of taking you through the changes finalised by the UK government last Friday on the Job Retention Scheme grant. However, we've also been informed that there shall be an additional Treasury directive on this topic, so we may be back here telling you about further changes in future. Anna will then talk to you about what considerations that you need to make to get your workforce back up and running and the plentiful array of how that may look. So first of all, about Goodwille. Goodwille was founded back in 1997. For more than 20 years, we have offered essential business services for companies looking to enter, grow or scale in the UK. So our services are all under one roof. They consist of 5 departments, which are governance, finance, HR, payroll, and virtual office. We pride ourselves in allowing our clients to focus on the things that bring value to their business, knowing that the other tasks are in safe hands. So as mentioned, today you will be hearing from myself and Anna from the Goodwille People Management Department. We have years of experience in assisting Nordic and other overseas companies with their HR needs. You can see from the slide some of the core areas that we assist with. However, in summary, we deal with the full life cycle of an employee, from recruitment to termination and everything in between. So, the coronavirus job retention scheme. Well, the guidance has certainly changed many times over the last months since it was created, and certainly as a new concept to the UK, it has perplexed the best of us. At the beginning of June, the UK government announced changes to the job retention scheme, the plans of which were confirmed last Friday. The scheme rules will continue to run as they are currently until the 30th of June. Then from the 1st of July onwards, we are going to see some changes and more flexibility to the scheme. So as mentioned, the original scheme rules will apply for now. So if we can look at a brief recap of those. Employers whose businesses have been affected by coronavirus have been able to furlough their employees and backdate this furlough period to the 1st of March. On the 12th of June, the employer guidance was issued to follow suit with the Treasury direction. So this specifically says, if you cannot maintain your workforce because your operations have been affected by coronavirus, then you can furlough employees. So to date, in order for employees to be furloughed, they have not been able to carry out any work for their employer while on furlough. And the minimum period for furlough has been set at 3 weeks, with payment for the furlough periods being reimbursed via a government grant set at 80% of salary and capped at £2,500. Also, the government grant has covered employers' NIC contributions and auto-enrolment pension payments as part of the grant. And in order to be placed on furlough, employees must have been on their employer's RTI payroll by the 19th of March. And in addition to that, employers have been required to come to a written agreement with the employee in order to change the terms and conditions of their employment. And those written agreements are required to be kept on file for 6 years for audit purposes. So as mentioned, changes are afoot. The Chancellor announced last Friday the finer details on how this second phase of the CGRS will work, beginning on the 1st of July. The new measures are set out to allow employees to gradually return to work, having been furloughed under phase 1 of the CGRS. So it's hoped that this will, in the main, help smaller businesses in particular. Firstly, it was announced that the scheme would be closed to new entrants from the 30th of June. However, we need to be mindful that the existing rules still stand. So this means that the minimum furlough period of 3 weeks will still need to have been met by any employees that you have on board within the furlough scheme at the moment. So the latest date to furlough an employee who had not previously been furloughed was set at 10th of June in order to meet the existing criteria to then allow you access to the more flexible scheme moving forward. So if you currently have employees on furlough, you'll be able to take advantage of the new flexible scheme from 1st of July. And this covers workers who are employed on any sort of employment contract. So that could be full-time, part-time, agency workers, flexible workers, or 0-hour contracts. The main changes, so the minimum furlough period is now going to be set at 1 week. So you can furlough your employees 7 days at a time rather than 3 weeks. The grant support from the government will slowly taper, so we will go through this shortly. Employees can be brought back to work on a part-time basis from the 1st of July. So the employer may decide the hours and shift patterns that the employees will work. They can work as much or as little as you need. And as you are entering into a new working hour arrangement with your employees, then this must cover at least 1 week periods at a time and be confirmed to the employee in writing. So this means that employers can only claim the money in minimum blocks of 7 calendar days. So if we can just flip forward one slide, and we can take a look at the tapering of the grant. From the 1st of July, the grant sum from the UK government will remain as it is currently at 80% salary, capped at £2,500. From the 1st of August, we will see the grant sum from the UK government remain as it is currently at 80% salary and capped at £2,500. However, the employer will be responsible for their employer national insurance contributions and pension contributions. Then we see from the 1st of September, it gets a little bit more complicated. The grant sum from the UK government will reduce to 70% of wages, to a cap of £2,187.50. However, the employer will be responsible for employers' NICs and pension contributions, but also 10% of the employee wages to then bring us back up to that 80% cap of the total wages before. So that works out as £312.50, where you were furloughing employees who had reached that £2,500 salary cap previously. Then from the 1st of October, the grant sum from the UK government will reduce to 60% of wages, to a cap of £1,875. Again, you will be responsible for employer NICs and pension contributions, and then also the 20% additional top-up to make up the 80% of total wages, or capped at £2,500. So that means a maximum top-up will be required of £625 from yourselves should your employees have been capped at the £2,500. So you can top up more if you wish, but this is a guidance as to the minimum amounts that will be expected from you if you are bringing, or if you are still continuing to furlough employees at this point. So if we can just move back a slide. Okay. So of course, the portion of the grant given by the UK government will be proportional to the hours not worked by the employee. So we need to remember that this grant is allowing you to furlough your employees part-time. Of course, you may continue to furlough at 100% if that's what you need to do as a business, as long as the employee is not carrying out any work. As mentioned briefly, you can of course continue to choose to top up the furlough grant sum being paid to the employee. So this should all be reflected in the temporary agreement which you have with your employees. Furloughed employees retain their statutory rights, so that includes their right to statutory sick pay. This means that any furloughed employees, should they become ill due to coronavirus or any other cause, they must be paid at least their statutory sick pay. So if you have employees who are self-isolating or shielding because of coronavirus, then it's up to you to decide whether you are going to move those employees onto statutory sick pay or to keep them on furlough at their furloughed rate. They can't be on both at the same time, for clarity. If a furloughed employee becomes sick and is moved on to SSP, as mentioned, you can no longer claim for furloughed salary, but you are required to pay SSP yourself as a company. So even though the employee may qualify for a rebate of 2 weeks of SSP, if the sickness is longer than 2 weeks, and that will be up to yourselves as a company to pay for that period of sickness. So any employees in this situation, they can continue to be furloughed from 1st of July if they have been sick prior to this point, as long as you have previously submitted a claim for them in relation to the furlough period of at least 3 consecutive weeks, taking place any time between the 1st of March and 30th of June. Likewise, if an employee started unpaid leave after the 28th of February, then you would have been eligible to put them on furlough instead, as long as you did this by 10th of June for a minimum period of at least 3 consecutive weeks, taking place any time between the 1st of March and the 30th of June. And if you do put them on furlough, then you should pay them at least 80% of their regular wages for the hours which you record them as being on furlough, up to the monthly cap of £2,500. So just for clarity there, the 3-week period at the furlough pay rather than unpaid leave. So practicality-wise, at present, pre-1st of July, staff cannot work for the same company while on furlough. From the 1st of July, if you do bring your employees back to work part-time, then you may claim from the grant on a pro-rata basis for the hours that the employee has not been working. However, you must pay your employees in full for the time that they have worked for you. If you're making a claim for the grant, then employers will be required to submit data on the usual hours that an employee would be expected to work in any one claim period, and also any actual hours that they've worked. In addition, from July, employers cannot make claims that cross calendar months. So an employer would need to make a separate claim for the period up to 30th of June, and so on and so forth. Up to June 10th, employers could enrol an unlimited amount of members of its workforce onto the government scheme. But from 1st of July, the number of workers that an employer can put on furlough will be capped at the maximum number that it has previously claimed for in any single one claim period previously. So the only exception to this rule would be where an employee has been returning from family leave of any sort, so maternity, paternity, and they can then be furloughed for the first time after this date, provided that they meet the usual criteria and the employer has previously furloughed employees in general within their workforce. So this basically means, in simplistic terms, that if you have a workforce of 100 employees and you have rotated your furloughed employees previously, then per claim period, you may have made a claim for 50 employees per time. From the 1st of July, this means that you may not then make a claim for 100 employees in a single claim period, because you may be bringing them all back to work on a part-time basis. So there are some example calculations on the UK Gov website to help with your calculations and how to make those submissions, which hopefully will help. You will also need to think about paperwork. So under the current rules, employees must cease all work for their employer while on furlough. If you're now looking to furlough under the new rules, it's likely that you'll need to make new furlough agreements. the agreements need to meet the reality of the arrangement that you have with your employees. They are a change to your terms and conditions with your employees, and they need to be retained for audit purposes to back up claims which you are making for the grant. So hopefully that helps clarify some parts for you. Do feel free to ask questions and reach out to us later. But for now, I'll pass you on to Anna, who will talk to you about the practicalities of returning to work.
Thank you, Jacqui. It is definitely time to start thinking about what work will look like once the stay-at-home directions are being eased down. It is time to start planning work and returning back to normal, whatever the new normal might actually look like. You need to start planning in both short-term and long-term, so asking questions like what the business should do now, but what it should look like in the future also. In terms of short-term plans, you need to consider what is likely to be a staged return to work. The guiding principle should always be your employees' health and safety and protecting their well-being. Any safety risks have to be addressed, identified, and managed because as an employer, you have a duty of care. Your organizational needs will, of course, vary depending on the model of your return to work, but there will always be some common issues you need to address. You should start preparing and carrying out a risk assessment to manage the risks of coronavirus in your business. This will help you to understand and claim what you should do and ensure that the environment you're providing your people with is safe. You can then identify what measures you have to implement to make your workplace safe, and that can mean anything. So it can be, for example, marking out walking routes, cable tying doors, supplying PPE where it is necessary, using plexiglass, and so on, so on. It all depends on your business. You will have to introduce different measures depending on the business model. It is still advised for employees to work from home if they can. General consensus in London is that offices will probably start coming back to work towards September just because of the public transport. Most of us have to use it on a daily basis, and of course it will be certainly limited to a certain extent. If your workforce is working from home and will continue to do so for a period of time, you need to think about what the working environment is and what you can do to improve it for health and safety purposes. You can consider providing your employees with the necessary equipment such as chairs from the office, desks, and extra screens and anything that would help them. It is not a legal requirement. However, if you are asking questions and conducting work from home assessment, you then are aware of the issues, then certainly you should consider this, particularly if your business is in a position to offer it and you can budget it in. Remember that the equipment will still belong to the company, so there is no sort of scare in here. You can also think about introducing a temporary working from home policy or making any reasonable adjustments, for example, for people who can have childcare responsibilities and so on. Maybe you can perhaps think about offering flexible working or shorter hours. You also have to consider supporting mental health. If your business has an employee assistance program already or an access to occupational health advisors, it is definitely a good idea to make your employees aware of the services these parties offer. If you, however, have to reopen the business, bear in mind that the workplaces still need to observe the government social distancing rules. Where businesses are part of the sectoral return to work, so for example, retail stores or restaurants, you must conduct a detailed risk assessment to protect your employees' health and minimize the risk of infection. You can think about planning the rota or the schedule you have in a way that doesn't require the employees to arrive or leave at the same time. And you have to provide washing facilities next to the doors and exit points, where it is of course not possible. Hand sanitizer would be a good option as well. Keep work areas 2 meters apart if you can. If it is of course not possible, then you have to think about keeping the number of people in each work area as low as possible. You can put a signage to indicate where people should be. You can insert plexi screens, maybe arrange the work area so people are working side by side rather than face to face. If you cannot keep the 2 meters apart, you should provide masks and PPE equipment as well. Special attention should definitely be kept to shared spaces, for example, toilets, canteens, and the break rooms or staff rooms. You might think about staggering break times so that people are not using break rooms or canteens all at the same time. You can use outside spaces if the weather allows to do so, and you can encourage staff to actually stay on site during the working hours so they can effectively social distance with others. Once you have resolved the strictly physical items of the return to work, you also need to consider how to prepare your workforce to do so. So first of all, given that the priority for every business is managing the safe return to the workplace for staff, it is crucial to work very close in collaboration with your health and safety people or occupational health teams wherever possible. Communicate all the practical measures that you are taking to staff on a regular basis to help reassure them that their health is your top priority. Make sure that employees are clear about what rules are in place and what they should adhere to in the workplace as well as in home, especially if they begin to feel unwell. It is recommended that you appoint a health and safety representative who is obviously trained in health and safety to be able to support employees if they have any concerns, questions, or they want to know what their workplace is doing. You also need to consider a long-term plan for your business. The Furlough scheme that Jacqui told us about will finish in October, and it's important for you to plan your workforce strategy ahead. Think about what you want to do, who you want to bring back currently, and create a selection process for coming off furlough. As Jacqui mentioned before, you should have a written agreement with staff who are furloughed, so you need to give them a reasonable notice to come back to work. Your agreement could have specified that, but if it didn't, there is no minimum length of notice required to be given. However, it still needs to be reasonable. Some people might have childcare or other responsibilities that they need to rearrange. In terms of bringing people back, you should clearly consider who you want to come back and who you want to come back first and when you need to bring them on. You can base the criteria on the standard of work, the skills, experience, and qualifications they do have, the disciplinary record, but you can also consider the practical aspect of it. So, for example, could you bring someone who volunteered to come back, for example, or if someone who lives close and doesn't have to travel on public transport? So it's all about looking at the practical side as well. Remember that this criteria cannot be discriminatory in any way. If your selection process was found to be discriminatory because of any protected characteristics, and that can be anything like sex, race, disability, and so on, the employee may actually have a claim for discrimination. It is entirely possible that some of your employees might not to come back to work and to remain on furlough. In this case, you have to really understand why, so communication is the key. Many employees may be, for example, scared of coming back to the workplace or traveling, and if so, then your preparation will definitely pay off. As an employer, you need to be able to show that you have done your utmost to make the workplace safe. An employee may be actually justified in refusing to attend the work if they have a significant health and safety concern, and if you have not made the relevant adjustments and preparations, then you might find yourself in a tribunal if the employee is dismissed or walks out because you didn't provide the safe working environment. You definitely should think about making any reasonable adjustments and speak to your employees to help them return to the workplace before taking any disciplinary actions or so on. In your furlough plans, you should also consider managing annual leave. Staff are now allowed to carry forward some of the statutory holidays if they were unable to take them in the current leave year due to coronavirus. You should still, however, encourage staff to take previously agreed holidays if you are in a position to do so. Even if people are working from home, they still need time away from work. You can think about reviewing your policy around annual leave and make clear to employees what will happen if they decide to travel abroad. They will have to isolate for 14 days upon the return, and not adhering to this rule can be seen as a criminal offense. So you cannot sort of get employees to the workplace if you know they were abroad. You cannot unfortunately ban them from going abroad, but you can make it clear that the self-isolation period would be unpaid as the employee is effectively not able to carry out their duties. You may choose to allow employees to take this period of leave as annual leave if they have the sufficient entitlement to do so, and that could as well help you to manage the annual leave and make sure that it's not stacking up to the level in which you cannot give anyone annual leave, basically. You also need to think about what will happen after October once the scheme is finished. How will your company look like going forward? Will you, for example, offer working from home in a part-time hours as well? Will you, for example, base work from the office or rather from home? Will you have to make any redundancies? These are all important questions, and if you do already know what you will have to make, and that if you need to make some cost cuts, you need to consider how you're using the furlough scheme and be very mindful of how you do it. You could be tempted to keep the people who you would have later on make redundant on furlough to maybe get them some extra income over this month. However, you would have to be very careful with that, because it can lead to a belief that the redundancy process was not fair, as you've already made the decision before it even happened. Thank you very much for listening for now. We're going to move on to questions now, if we have any. Jacqui, can you see if we have anything?
Yes, we've had a few questions that have come in actually, so I will start from the top. Feel free to jump in, Anna, if you would like to take over answering anything in particular. So we have an anonymous attendee who has asked, can I furlough someone back and forth, for example? So 1 week on furlough, 1 week at work, in order to rotate my employees. So the answer to that is yes. At the moment, you can furlough or rotate your employees at present, but the minimum periods are set at 3 weeks. So up until the end of June, you can rotate on a 3-weekly basis. From the 1st of July onwards, the requirement is that you are furloughing for seven days per time in any claim period. So if you want to do that and bring your employees on and off, then of course you can. What I would recommend is that you draw up an agreement paperwork that specifies that that's exactly what you're going to be doing with your employees, and what the payment agreements are going to be, whether you're topping up more than the maximum amount that you're allowed to as per the breakdown that we looked at earlier, just so that you're not changing paperwork on a weekly basis, because that can clearly be a lot to manage. Anna, have you got any additionals to that? Or?
Yeah, I think it would be also very important to actually speak to your employees and provide a bit of stability, as if you were changing the scheduled hours and everything on a weekly basis. They need to know how much more or less they will get paid as well. So it would be good to be very transparent and speak about the plans in a longer term plan, just a week.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you're furloughing or rotating your entire workforce, then that makes it fair, because, you know, ultimately, unless you're going to be topping up everyone's wages, then some people may like to be able to come back on a bi-weekly basis, because that means they're getting a week's worth of their normal salary rather than the furloughed amount. Okay, so a second question again from another anonymous attendee is, if I furlough an employee but eventually lay someone off, will I still get my claim granted, since the scheme was put in place to save jobs? Yes, and I'm assuming that the person who's asked the question is referring to redundancy, because we don't typically tend to have layoffs in this country. It means a different thing. I'll not bore you with that now. Yes, the whole theory or philosophy behind the scheme is that, you know, this scheme is meant to be in place to try and save jobs, but obviously the government understand that's not going to be possible in every case, and sometimes, you know, businesses just can't afford to keep their workforce moving forward. They may need to make everyone redundant. They may need to make it a more lean workforce. So in that situation, you would go through the usual redundancy process. So you would base your selection criteria based on the jobs titles that you need to lose, and then you would look and see what skills that you need to retain in the company, and go through your normal redundancy process and consultation procedures, the same as you would do outside of a furlough scenario. So I hope that does answer the question. Okay, I'm sorry, trying to multitask here and I'm not too great at it. Okay, so the third question from another anonymous attendee: my employees are on furlough. can they still help me with the business unpaid, volunteering, so to speak? So this one's a bit of a tricky one, I think, from July onwards. Absolutely, at the moment, I would say no, because the guidance is very clear in terms of if you are furloughed under the current rules, then you cannot carry out any element of service or anything that would constitute work. So this would definitely be in contravention of the rules of the furlough scheme. If we're looking at July onwards, then of course you can bring your employees back to work part-time. But what the person seems to be asking is if you're allowed to do that and maybe have that an unpaid arrangement. Now, the scheme rules are quite clear from July onwards to say that any period of time that the employee works for you, that you need to take the cost of that and pay the employee their normal original hours and their hourly rate or salary for that portion of time. You could potentially come to another written agreement with the employees to say, if they were happy about it, to have that portion of the week unpaid, but it may make it a bit tricky when you're actually making submissions. There's certainly nothing that has been written about this in the guidance. And I do feel that if this was audited in years to come, that this may not be looked unfavourably. So yeah, I mean, Anna, have you got any feelings on that?
I definitely agree with you, Jacqui, and I think volunteering as such in the guidance is more meant for volunteering for example, charities or contributing to the society rather than volunteering for actual employer, because that's still conducts work. Yeah.
It's just, yeah, it's just from July onwards, because we do have that part-time allowance, the guidance is clear on the amount of money that the employer would need to pay. I'm just thinking if you could maybe come to a written arrangement with the employee to agree that they would be volunteering or working unpaid for a portion of time. I think that's certainly something that's not been addressed yet, and it's all very new guidance that's been written by the UK Gov, so certainly something to explore. But my gut feeling is to think no, that probably wouldn't be the best avenue to go down. Okay, great. And another anonymous attendee, if a furloughed employee goes on annual leave during furlough, do I have to pay their full-time salary myself, or can I make a claim for these expenses as well? So we've had a lot of queries on this, and this has been a point of contention for quite a number of months, where the UK government have very helpfully not given us any specific guidance on this, but with all of our legal partners that we've been discussing this with, the general feeling is that if the holiday or the annual leave that has been taken forms part of an employee's statutory leave, so not their contractual leave, but statutory. And when we talk about this, we mean for a full-time employee, that would be their 20 days holiday per year plus their bank holidays. So if you offer your employees 25 days and it's that portion of holiday that they're taking, then you wouldn't be able to claim for the additional 5 days, so the 25 days, if that makes sense. But for the portion of holiday which is linked to statutory holiday, so it's their main core statutory holiday, the 20 days plus 8 days bank holidays, then you pay that full time, so full-time rate, so their usual contractual rate, but you can make a claim for the 80% of that holiday, of those days that they've taken as holiday. I feel like I haven't answered that very clearly, Anna. Do you want to dip in?
So you will have to pay your employees for any days that are on holidays at 100% rate, and you can claim back 80% of it from the furlough scheme, as long as the holidays are their statutory holidays rather than contractual. So
yeah, exactly. That sounds so much better out of your mouth than it did when it came out.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, and then we have one more question. Yes. How do I complete a risk assessment for my employees' home offices? So there's a couple of ways that you can do that. Typically, because we're in a pandemic, a global pandemic, we shouldn't really be in a situation where we're visiting people's houses. So it's clearly not going to happen. But what a lot of businesses have been doing is compiling a risk assessment form. So depending on, presumably if your employees working from home, then they generally have an office job. So they will need a safe place to sit and desk, and you will need to understand if they have suitable electrical sockets and all of those sorts of things. So you will compile a questionnaire and send that out to your employees, get them to complete it, and then identify if there's any areas that basically could need some level of improvement. And there's also a lot of DSE information out there as well. So that would be desk side assistance. So making sure that your employees know how to set up their workstation correctly, excuse me, that their computer and desk and chair are at the right level, and so on, with diagrams and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of help out there. The HSE site is very useful. But equally, if you want to reach out to Goodwille, then we have some basic information that we can help you with. For clarity, we are not health and safety experts, but we do partner with health and safety experts where we glean this information from. Anna, do you have anything to add on that? Because you've been doing a lot of work on this area.
Definitely the HSE website is very good in terms of the information they provide, and they also have a sectoral advice. So for example, in particular, for example, retail, hospitality, working from home, so you can get a lot of ideas from there and design your questionnaire in the way to answer the questions that you actually want to know. So ask employees what they have already and what you need to provide. And I think it's all about conversating with them as well, and just asking what their situation is, understanding it, and as a business deciding how much you can help.
And Helen has asked, will this presentation be available online? So just for the audience, yes, this presentation is being recorded, so it will be distributed for you to watch.
Okay.
All our questions.
Well, you have done a great job. So, well, thank you so much, and thank you everyone who attended. It was quite a few actually. Thank you so much to Goodwille for putting this together, our most trusted and long-term partner at NBCC. Yeah, well, you have a lovely weekend. It's midsummer celebration in Sweden today, so maybe there'll be some celebration in the office today.
Yes, definitely.
Good. All right. Thank you, everyone. And we will speak soon.